The blood on Amelia Robinson's hands had long since dried when she saddled her mare at dawn, but she could still feel its phantom warmth against her palms. She had buried her husband Thomas 3 days ago in the rocky soil outside Tucson, Arizona, where the cholera had taken him along with 16 others in their wagon train. And now, she had a promise to keep that would carry her 400 miles north through Apache territory, to a town she had never seen. Thomas had made her swear on his deathbed that she would find his brother in Prescott and deliver the deed to their family's ranch in Texas, the last piece of their shared dream that had died with him in a canvas tent, while she held his fevered hand and lied that everything would be fine. The year was 1876, and the Arizona Territory was still wild enough to swallow a lone woman without a trace. But Amelia had discovered that grief could make a person reckless in ways that fear never could. She packed light because she had little left, just her clothes, a bedroll, the Winchester rifle Thomas had taught her to shoot, and the leather satchel containing the deed, $43 and a daguerreotype of her wedding day when she had still believed the West held promise instead of graves. The wagon master tried to convince her to stay with the train until they reached California, but she could not bear another day of sympathetic looks from the other wives, could not stomach one more well-meaning woman patting her arm and saying that God had a plan. She left Tucson heading north as the September sun climbed over the Rincon Mountains, painting the desert in shades of amber and rust. Her mare, a sturdy bay named Constance, picked her way along the rutted road with steady patience. Amelia had always been a capable rider, something her father had insisted upon back in Missouri, though he had never imagined his daughter would one day ride alone through hostile country with nothing but her wits and a rifle for protection. The landscape stretched endlessly around her, all saguaro cacti and creosote bush, mountains rising in purple ridges against a sky so blue it hurt to look at directly. She made camp that first night beside a dried creek bed, building a small fire and eating hardtack that tasted like sawdust in her mouth. Everything tasted like sawdust now. She had lost 12 pounds since Thomas died, her dresses hanging loose on a frame that had always been slender. At 23, she felt ancient, as though grief had added decades to her bones. She sat watching the flames and tried not to think about how Thomas used to make her laugh with his terrible impressions of the wagon master's Boston accent, how he would hold her close at night and whisper about the ranch they would build, the children they would raise, the life that stretched before them like an open road. The second day brought her through rolling desert country, past abandoned mines and the occasional ranch house sitting lonely against the horizon. She saw a group of riders in the distance and changed her course to avoid them, her heart hammering until they disappeared from view. A rattlesnake buzzed a warning as Constance nearly stepped on it, and the mare danced sideways while Amelia held tight to the reins, her pulse racing. She was learning that the desert held 1,000 ways to die, and she wondered if Thomas was watching from wherever the dead went, if he was proud of her stubbornness or appalled by her foolishness. On the third day, she reached the small settlement of Gila Bend, a collection of adobe buildings that seemed to shimmer in the heat like a mirage. She had heard of the town from other travelers, knew it sat along the Gila River, where the Butterfield Overland Mail had once run before the Apache troubles made the route too dangerous. The town looked half deserted, weathered by sun and wind until the buildings themselves seemed part of the desert landscape. She rode down the single dusty street past a general store, a saloon, a livery stable, and what might have been a hotel though the sign had faded beyond reading. Amelia's canteen was nearly empty, and Constance needed water and rest. She dismounted in front of the livery, her legs stiff from 3 days in the saddle, and led the mare inside where the air hung thick with the smell of hay and horse sweat. An old Mexican man emerged from the shadows, his face creased with 1,000 wrinkles, his eyes kind beneath bushy white eyebrows. "Water for your horse, Senora?" he asked, his English heavily accented. "Please," Amelia said, her voice hoarse from disuse. "And feed if you have it. I can pay. 2 bits for the day, 4 if she stays the night." "Just the day," Amelia said, though she had no clear plan beyond that. "Where can I fill my canteen?" The old man gestured toward the back of the stable where a pump stood over a wooden trough. "The water, she is good here. Not like some places where is too much alkali." Amelia pumped water into the trough and watched Constance drink deeply, then filled her canteen and drank herself, the water cool and sweet down her parched throat. She had not realized how thirsty she was, how the desert had been leaching moisture from her body like salt drawing water from meat. When she turned, the old man was watching her with an expression she could not quite read. "You travel alone, Senora?" "I do." "Is not safe." "The Apache, they are quiet now, but quiet like the snake before it strikes. And there are other men, bad men, who would see a woman alone and think only of what they could take." "I have a rifle," Amelia said, touching the Winchester where it hung from her saddle. "A rifle is good." "Better is not to be alone." He paused, studying her face. "You run from something or to something." The question caught her off guard, and to her horror she felt tears burning behind her eyes. She blinked them back fiercely. "I am delivering something to Prescott, a family matter." The old man nodded slowly. "Prescott is far, maybe 250 miles, maybe more, through country where the Apache ride. You should wait, find others going that way." "I cannot wait," Amelia said, and the finality in her voice ended the conversation. She left Constance in the old man's care and walked back out into the blazing afternoon sun. The heat pressed down on her like a physical weight, and she could feel sweat trickling down her spine beneath her heavy dress. She needed supplies, perhaps a better map, though she had been following the route north with reasonable success so far. The general store beckoned with the promise of shade, and she crossed the street, her boots stirring small clouds of dust with each step. The store was dim and relatively cool, shelves stocked with canned goods, tools, bolts of fabric, and all the necessities of frontier life. A woman stood behind the counter, middle-aged and sturdy, with intelligent eyes that took in Amelia's dusty clothes and worn face in a single glance. "Help you with something?" the woman asked. "I need supplies for the road. Beans, coffee, jerky if you have it, cornmeal." The woman began gathering items, wrapping them in brown paper. "Traveling far, far enough." "I ask because it is not common to see a woman alone out here. Most have the sense to stay with their wagons or wait for the stage." Amelia felt a flash of irritation. "I appreciate your concern, but I am quite capable of managing my own affairs." The woman's expression softened slightly. "I meant no offense. I ran this store alone for 3 years after my husband died of a snakebite. I know what it is to be a woman making her own way. I also know what it costs." The understanding in her voice made Amelia's defenses crack just slightly. "I am sorry for your loss, and I for yours, whatever it might be. A woman does not ride alone through this country unless she has lost something that matters more than safety." Amelia paid for her supplies in silence, and the woman wrapped them carefully, adding an extra packet of dried apples without charge. "For the road," she said simply. Outside, the afternoon was beginning its slow slide toward evening, the shadows lengthening across the dusty street. Amelia stood on the store's wooden porch, her packages in her arms, and tried to decide what to do next. She could push on tonight, make a few more miles before dark, or she could find a place to sleep and start fresh in the morning. Her body ached with exhaustion, but the thought of stopping, of having nothing to do but think, filled her with a restless anxiety that had become her constant companion since Thomas died. She was still standing there when she heard the sound of hoofbeats and turned to see a rider coming down the street. He sat his horse with the easy confidence of a man born to the saddle, his body moving in rhythm with the animal's gait. Even from a distance, Amelia could see he was tall, broad-shouldered, wearing the practical clothes of a working cowboy. Worn denim, a faded blue shirt, a hat that had seen better days. He rode a large roan gelding that looked like it could carry him from one end of the territory to the other, without complaint. The rider drew up in front of the saloon and dismounted with fluid grace, looping his reins over the hitching post. He moved like a man who was tired but not defeated, who had done hard work and would do more tomorrow without complaint. Something about the way he carried himself made Amelia think of Thomas, though they looked nothing alike. Thomas had been slender and dark where this man was solid and sun-bronzed, but they shared that quality of quiet competence that she had always found reassuring. The cowboy disappeared into the saloon, and Amelia shook herself from her reverie. She had no business standing in the street staring at strange men. She needed to retrieve Constance and decide on her next move. She was walking back toward the livery when she heard a commotion from the saloon, raised voices that carried through the thin walls. She told herself it was none of her concern, but then she heard the unmistakable sound of breaking glass and a woman's cry of pain or fear. Amelia hesitated, her better judgment warring with an impulse she did not fully understand. In the end, the impulse won. She set her packages down on the porch of the livery and walked toward the saloon, her hand resting on the small pistol she kept in her skirt pocket, a Derringer Thomas had given her for protection. The voices were clearer now, a man's rough laughter and a woman's pleading tone. She pushed through the swinging doors into a dim interior that smelled of whiskey, tobacco, and unwashed bodies. The saloon was nearly empty in the late afternoon. Just the bartender, a woman in a stained dress who was backing away from a large, bearded man with wild eyes, and the cowboy she had seen ride in, who was standing very still near the bar with a glass of whiskey in his hand and a watchful expression on his face. "I said I would dance with you when I am done serving drinks," the woman was saying, her voice shaking. "Please, just let me work." "I say you will dance with me now," the bearded man growled, lurching toward her. His words were slurred with drink, and Amelia could see the bartender edging toward something behind the bar, probably a shotgun. The cowboy set his glass down with a quiet click that somehow carried through the room. "Lady said she would dance later," he said, his voice low and even. "Might be you should respect that and sit yourself down." The bearded man wheeled around, his hand dropping to the gun at his hip. "Might be you should mind your own damn business." "Might be," the cowboy agreed, "but I am making it my business anyway." Time seemed to slow and thicken. Amelia could see the bearded man's muscles bunching, could see the cowboy's hand hanging loose at his side. Nowhere near his own weapon, but somehow ready all the same. She pulled the Derringer from her pocket, her hand surprisingly steady, and cocked it with a small, distinct sound that made every head in the room turn toward her. "Gentlemen," she said, her voice carrying despite the tremor she felt in her chest, "I believe the lady has made her wishes clear. Perhaps we can all act like civilized people instead of animals." The bearded man stared at her, his whiskey-fogged brain trying to process this new development. "Who the hell are you?" "No one of consequence. But I am someone holding a gun, which should be consequence enough." The cowboy's eyes met hers across the dimness of the saloon, and something passed between them. a recognition that had nothing to do with prior acquaintance and everything to do with seeing another person who had reached the point where they simply did not care anymore. He gave her the smallest nod, then turned back to the bearded man. "Seems like you are outnumbered and outgunned," he said, still in that same even tone. "Be ashamed to get shot over a dance that was not even that important to you 10 minutes ago." The mathematics of the situation finally penetrated the bearded man's drunken haze. He looked from the cowboy to Amelia to the bartender, who had indeed produced a shotgun from beneath the bar and made a disgusted sound. "Place is full of cowards and women," he spat, but he was already moving toward the door, stumbling slightly as he pushed past Amelia and out into the street. The tension drained from the room like water from a broken barrel. The woman in the stained dress let out a shaky breath and pressed her hand to her chest. "Thank you," she said to both the cowboy and Amelia. "He has been drinking since noon and getting meaner with every bottle." The bartender lowered his shotgun. "Drinks on the house for both of you," he said gruffly. Amelia carefully uncocked the Derringer and slipped it back into her pocket, aware that her hands were now trembling with reaction. She had never pointed a gun at a person before, had never been in a situation quite so volatile. The cowboy walked toward her, and she saw that he was older than she had first thought, maybe 30 or 31, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the sun and eyes the color of cedar wood. "That was either very brave or very foolish," he said, and there was a hint of amusement in his voice. "I have not decided which." "It was foolish," Amelia admitted, "but I am finding that grief makes a person do foolish things." The amusement faded from his eyes, replaced by something gentler. "I am sorry for your loss. Thank you." She found herself wanting to explain, to tell this stranger about Thomas and the promise and the 400 miles that stretched before her like a penance. Instead, she said, "I should collect my supplies and be on my way. You are leaving tonight." "The sun will be down in an hour, maybe less. I am aware of the time." He studied her for a long moment. "Forgive my forwardness, but I could not help overhearing your conversation at the general store earlier. You are heading north alone." "I am." "That is a good way to get yourself killed." "The desert does not care about your courage or your grief." Amelia felt her jaw tighten. "Once again, I appreciate your concern, but I am quite capable of managing my own affairs." "I do not doubt your capability. I am questioning your judgment, which is a different thing entirely." He paused, seeming to wrestle with some internal debate. "My name is Preston Xavier. I work a ranch about 60 miles north of here, and I am heading back there in the morning. If you are traveling north, you are welcome to ride with me at least that far. 2 guns are better than 1 in Apache country." "I do not know you." "That is true. But you did just watch me face down a drunk with me, and you pointed a gun to help a woman you do not know either. Seems like maybe we both have a sense of what is right, which is a reasonable foundation for a day or 2 of shared travel." Amelia wanted to refuse. She wanted to maintain the solitary nature of her grief, to carry it alone across the miles like a burden no one else could share. But she was also practical enough to know that the old Mexican man and the woman at the general store, and now this cowboy, were all telling her the same thing. What she was attempting was dangerous to the point of suicidal. "I will think about it," she said finally. Preston Xavier nodded, accepting this. "I will be leaving at first light from the livery. If you are there, you are welcome to the company. If not, I wish you safe travels." He touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that managed to be both respectful and somehow sad, then walked back to the bar to claim his free drink. Amelia left the saloon and stood in the street as the sun touched the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. She collected her supplies from the livery porch and found the old Mexican man waiting with Constance already brushed down and fed. "You will stay the night?" he asked. "Yes. Is there a hotel?" "Hotel is closed 2 years now. But Senora Martinez, she runs boarding house. 2 streets over, the house with blue door. She will have room." Amelia thanked him and led Constance to the boarding house, a small adobe structure that was cleaner and better maintained than most of the buildings in town. Senora Martinez was a tiny woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense manner who showed Amelia to a small room with a narrow bed and a washstand. The room was simple but spotlessly clean, and after 3 nights sleeping on the hard ground, the bed looked like paradise. Amelia washed the dust from her face and hands, changed into a clean dress, and ate the simple supper Senora Martinez provided: beans, tortillas, and goat cheese that was sharp and good. There were 2 other boarders, both men who worked at the nearby copper mine, and they ate in silence, too tired for conversation. Amelia was grateful for their lack of curiosity. That night she lay in bed, listening to the sounds of Gila Bend settling into darkness. A dog barking, someone playing a harmonica badly, the wind rattling the shutters. She thought about Preston Xavier's offer, about the sensible thing to do versus the stubborn pride that had kept her alive these past weeks. She thought about Thomas, and whether he would want her to die in the desert trying to honor a deathbed promise, or whether he would want her to accept help when it was offered. She fell asleep with the question unresolved and dreamed of Thomas as he had been before the sickness, strong and laughing, his arms around her waist as they danced at their wedding. In the dream he leaned close and whispered, "Let someone help you, Amelia. You do not have to carry everything alone." She woke before dawn with tears on her cheeks and the decision already made. Preston Xavier was saddling his roan gelding when Amelia arrived at the livery, leading Constance. He looked up at the sound of her footsteps and nodded once, his expression neither surprised nor smug, just accepting. "Morning," he said. "Good morning." They prepared for travel in companionable silence. Preston checked his saddlebags, his rifle, the canteens hanging from his saddle horn. Amelia did the same, aware of him without quite looking at him, conscious of the easy efficiency with which he moved. When they were ready, they led their horses out into the pearl-gray light of pre-dawn and mounted up. "We will follow the river northeast," Preston said. "It is not the most direct route, but it keeps us near water and gives the horses easier ground. We should make my ranch by tomorrow evening if we push steady. I appreciate you letting me ride with you. Appreciate you not getting yourself killed before you got wherever you are going." They rode out of Gila Bend as the sun climbed over the eastern horizon, turning the sky from gray to pink to brilliant blue. The desert was cooler in the morning, almost pleasant, and Amelia felt something in her chest loosen slightly, a tension she had been carrying for days without quite realizing it. She was still alone with her grief, but now there was another living person nearby, another heartbeat in the vastness, and it made the world feel fractionally less hostile. Preston set an easy pace, letting the horses warm up gradually. He rode slightly ahead and to the left, his eyes constantly scanning the landscape, with the alertness of someone who had learned that danger could come from any direction. Amelia found herself studying him when he was not looking, noting the way he sat his horse, the weathered lines around his eyes, the scar that curved along his jaw like a pale parenthesis. They had been riding perhaps 2 hours when he spoke. "If you do not mind my asking, where exactly are you headed? I know you said north, but that covers a lot of territory." "Prescott, I need to deliver something to my husband's brother." "Your husband is not able to deliver it himself. My husband is dead." The words came out flat and hard. Cholera took him outside Tucson 9 days ago. Preston was quiet for a moment. I am sorry, that is a hard way to lose someone. Is there an easy way? No, but some ways are harder than others. He paused. You said you are carrying grief. I understand that better than you might think. Amelia glanced at him, surprised by the admission. You have lost someone, my wife. 3 years ago this past spring, complications from childbirth. We lost the baby too, a daughter we were going to name Sarah. The pain in his voice was old but not diminished, and Amelia felt a sharp kinship with this stranger who understood the particular weight of carrying on after loss. I am sorry, she said, and meant it. Thank you. Preston adjusted his hat against the climbing sun. I only mention it because I know what it is like. Those first months when you are just trying to put one foot in front of the other without thinking too hard about why. When the world seems like it is made of glass, and if you move wrong, everything will shatter. Yes, Amelia said softly. That is exactly what it is like. They rode on through country that grew gradually more rugged, the flat desert giving way to rolling hills studded with juniper and piñon pine. Preston led them to the Gila River where it ran shallow and quick over smooth stones, and they let the horses drink while they refilled their canteens. The water was cool and sweet, tasting of stone and sky. There is a place about 3 hours ahead where we can rest through the worst of the afternoon heat, Preston said. Old Way Station from the mail route. Roof is still mostly good and there is usually shade. You know this country well. I have ridden through it enough times. The ranch where I work, the Triple Cross, it runs cattle up in the high country during summer and drives them down to market in the fall. I have made this trip more times than I can count. You like it? The cowboy life, Preston considered the question. It is honest work. Hard but clean, if that makes sense. You know what is expected, and if you do it well, you can be proud of what you have accomplished. Not many things in life are that straightforward. They reached the way station just after noon. A stone building with a partially collapsed roof, but enough intact structure to provide blessed shade. Preston unsaddled the horses and hobbled them in a patch of scrub grass, while Amelia unpacked food from her saddlebags. They sat in the shade and ate jerky and hardtack, washing it down with water that was already growing warm in their canteens. Can I ask what you are delivering that is so important you would risk the trip alone? Preston asked. Amelia hesitated, then decided there was no reason not to tell him. A deed to a ranch in Texas. My husband and his brother inherited it from their father, but Thomas wanted to try his luck in California. We were supposed to establish ourselves and then send for his brother, but instead. She trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Instead, you are delivering the deed so his brother can claim his inheritance. Yes. It was Thomas's dying wish that I make sure his brother knew about the property. They were not close, had not spoken in years, but Thomas felt guilty about that at the end. He wanted to make amends, even though he would not be there to see it. Preston nodded slowly. So you are riding 400 miles through dangerous country to honor a promise to a dead man. When you say it like that, it sounds foolish. It sounds loyal. There is a difference. He took a long drink from his canteen. What will you do after? Once you have delivered the deed? Amelia realized she had not thought that far ahead. The journey to Prescott had filled her entire horizon, the promise to Thomas the only thing giving shape to her shapeless grief. What came after was a blank space she had been too afraid to examine. I do not know, she admitted. I suppose I will figure that out when the time comes. They rested through the hottest part of the afternoon, dozing in the shade while the horses cropped grass, and the sun hammered down on the desert with relentless intensity. When the shadows began to lengthen, they saddled up and rode on, following a trace that Preston said would lead them to the Triple Cross by the following evening. As they rode, Preston began to point out features of the landscape. The mountain where he had once tracked a mountain lion for 3 days, the canyon where flash floods could rise 10 feet in as many minutes, the distinctive rock formation that the Mexicans called El Viejo because it looked like an old man's profile. He talked in the easy way of someone who was comfortable with silence, but willing to fill it if company seemed warranted, and Amelia found herself listening with genuine interest. "You love this country," she observed. "I suppose I do. It is harsh and it will kill you if you are careless, but it is honest about what it is. I appreciate that. I am learning to appreciate it too, though I am not sure I will ever love it. It took my husband. The cholera took your husband. The land is just the land. It does not love or hate us. It just is." Amelia thought about that as they rode, thought about the way she had been blaming Arizona for Thomas's death when the truth was that people died everywhere, that grief could find you in Missouri or California or anywhere in between. The land was not her enemy. It was simply indifferent, which was somehow both more terrible and more comforting than malice. They made camp that night beside a spring that bubbled up from between the rocks, creating a small oasis of green in the otherwise brown landscape. Preston built a fire and made coffee that was strong enough to strip paint, and they sat drinking it while the stars emerged overhead in impossible profusion. More stars than Amelia had ever seen in her life. "I forget sometimes," Preston said quietly, looking up at the sky, "how beautiful the world can be. When you are grieving, it feels almost like an insult, the way the stars keep shining and the sun keeps rising like nothing has changed." "Yes," Amelia said. "I have thought that exact thing. Like the world should stop, should acknowledge the loss, but instead it just keeps going. My foreman, old Charlie, he said something to me after Sarah died. He said grief is just love with no place to go, and eventually you have to find somewhere to put all that love or it will eat you alive from the inside. Did you find somewhere to put it? Not yet, but I am still looking." They sat in silence for a while, watching the fire burn down to coals. Amelia realized that this was the most she had spoken to anyone since Thomas died, the most she had allowed herself to feel anything beyond the gray numbness that had become her constant state. It should have frightened her, this small crack in her armor, but instead it felt like relief, like setting down a burden she had been carrying for too long. "Thank you," she said suddenly. Preston looked at her, his face half in shadow. "For what? For not treating me like I am made of glass. For not offering empty platitudes, or telling me that time heals all wounds or any of the other things people say when they do not know what else to say. I learned after Sarah that the people who have not been through it cannot understand, and the people who have been through it know that words do not help much. Sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is just sit with them in silence." Amelia felt tears burning behind her eyes, the first she had allowed since leaving Tucson. "I think I needed someone to sit with me in silence. Then that is what I will do," and he did. They sat together as the fire died, and the night grew cold, not talking, not needing to talk, just two grieving people sharing space in the vast indifference of the desert. When Amelia finally rolled herself in her bedding and closed her eyes, she felt something inside her chest that was not quite hope, but was at least the memory of what hope had felt like. They rose with the sun and rode on, the landscape gradually shifting from low desert to high grassland as they climbed toward the Mogollon Rim. The air grew cooler and the vegetation changed, more juniper and pine now, the smell of resin sharp and clean. Preston pointed out the boundary markers for the Triple Cross, stone cairns placed at intervals along the property line. "How big is the ranch?" Amelia asked. About 40,000 acres, though not all of it is usable. A lot of it is mountains and canyon country. We run maybe 3,000 head of cattle, depending on the year. You must have a lot of men working there. About 15 hands, give or take. It is a good crew, mostly. Some of them have been there longer than I have. They reached the ranch headquarters in late afternoon, a collection of buildings nestled in a valley with a creek running through it. There was a main house built of logs and stone, a bunkhouse, a barn, several corrals, and various outbuildings. Smoke rose from the cookhouse chimney, and Amelia could see men moving around the yard, going about the business of running a working cattle ranch. A man emerged from the main house as they rode up, tall and graying with a face like tanned leather. He raised a hand in greeting. "Preston, about time you got back. We have been dealing with that damned fence line problem on the north section and could have used your help." "Sorry, Charlie, I got held up in Gila Bend." Preston dismounted and helped Amelia down, a courtesy she had not asked for but appreciated after the long ride. "This is Amelia Robinson. She is traveling to Prescott, and I offered her escort at least this far." Charlie's eyes took in Amelia's dusty clothes and tired face with the same shrewd assessment the woman at the general store had employed. "Madam, you are welcome to stay the night, maybe rest up a bit before you push on. I do not want to impose. No imposition. We do not get many visitors out here, especially not ladies. It will be a pleasant change." He turned to Preston. "You can put her in the guest room in the main house. Mrs. Chen has it ready, she always does." Preston led Amelia toward the main house while a young Mexican boy appeared to take their horses. Inside, the house was simply furnished but comfortable, with leather chairs, worn rugs, and a massive stone fireplace. A Chinese woman in her 50s appeared from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Mrs. Chen, this is Amelia Robinson. She will be staying the night." Mrs. Chen smiled warmly. "Welcome, welcome. I will show you to your room. You must be tired from the road." The guest room was small but clean, with a real bed, a washstand with a pitcher and bowl, and a window that looked out over the creek. Mrs. Chen brought hot water for washing and said that dinner would be ready in an hour. Amelia washed away the dust of travel and changed into her least worn dress, then stood at the window watching the activity in the ranch yard. She saw Preston talking with several of the hands, his easy manner with them suggesting respect rather than mere authority. One of the men said something that made Preston laugh, and Amelia realized it was the first time she had heard that sound from him. It changed his whole face, made him look younger and less burdened. Dinner was served in the main house's dining room, a hearty meal of beef stew, fresh bread, and dried apple pie. Besides Amelia, Preston, and Charlie, there was a young cowboy named Miguel who apparently served as Preston's second in command, and a quiet man called Dutch who handled the ranch's horses. The conversation flowed around Amelia like water around a stone, talk of cattle and water rights, and whether they should drive some of the herd to market early this year. "Prices are good right now," Charlie said, "but if we wait until October, they might be better." "Or they might be worse," Preston countered, "and we risk an early snow in the high country if we wait too long." They debated the question with the comfortable friction of people who had worked together long enough to disagree without anger, and Amelia found herself almost relaxing, lulled by the ordinariness of it all. This was what life looked like for people who were not consumed by grief, people who had problems that could be solved by good planning and hard work. After dinner, Preston walked her out onto the porch where the night air was cool and sweet with the smell of pine. "You are welcome to stay longer if you need to rest," he said. "The road from here to Prescott is rough, and it would be safer to go with the supply wagon when it makes the run next week. I appreciate the offer, but I need to keep moving. If I stop for too long, I am afraid I will not be able to start again. Preston nodded, understanding. Then at least take an extra day. Let your horse rest properly, get your strength back. One more day will not make much difference to your arrival, but it might make the difference in whether you arrive at all. Amelia wanted to refuse, but she could feel the bone-deep exhaustion in her body, the way her hands trembled slightly when she was tired. One day, she agreed. And then I need to go. She spent the next day resting, sleeping late for the first time in weeks, eating the good food Mrs. Chen prepared, wandering around the ranch and watching the men work. Preston was busy with ranch business, but he found her in the afternoon and asked if she wanted to see the horses. They walked to the corrals where Dutch was working with a young bay mare, teaching her to accept a saddle. The horse was nervous but willing, and Dutch worked with patient skill, his voice low and soothing. Preston leaned on the fence and watched with the appreciation of someone who understood good horsemanship. Dutch came from Germany 10 years ago, Preston said quietly. He barely spoke English and had nothing but the clothes on his back and a way with horses that bordered on magic. Charlie hired him on the spot and has never regretted it. Everyone here seems to have a story. Everyone everywhere has a story. Out here we just care less about where you came from and more about whether you can do the work. Amelia watched the mare finally stand still for the saddle, watched Dutch reward her with gentle strokes and soft words. "Do you think grief ever really goes away?" she asked suddenly. "Or do you just learn to carry it better?" Preston was quiet for a long moment. "I think maybe it becomes part of who you are, and you build your life around it instead of trying to push it away. Like a tree growing around a rock, you know. The rock is still there, but the tree finds a way to keep growing anyway." I like that image. Charlie told me that. He is full of sayings like that. Drives some of the younger hands crazy, but most of them are pretty wise if you think about them. They stood together watching the horses until the sun began to sink toward the western mountains, painting everything in shades of gold and amber. Amelia felt something shifting inside her, some small recognition that life might continue even after Thomas, that there might be days ahead that held something other than just pain and obligation. That night at dinner, Charlie asked Amelia about her plans after Prescott. She admitted that she had none, that she had been focused so entirely on the journey that she had not thought about what came after. "You could stay in Prescott," Charlie offered. "It is a decent town growing fast. Lots of opportunities for someone willing to work hard." "Or you could come back this way," Preston said, almost too casually. "We could use someone to help Mrs. Chen with the house and the cooking. She has been saying for a year that the work is getting to be too much for one person." Mrs. Chen swatted at him with her dish towel. "I said no such thing. But it would be nice to have another woman around, someone to talk to besides you rough men." Amelia felt warmth spreading through her chest, touched by the offer even though she had no intention of accepting it. "You are all very kind. Let me get to Prescott and deliver the deed, and then I will think about what comes next." The following morning, she prepared to leave with reluctance. Mrs. Chen packed her saddlebags with food, and Dutch had checked Constance's shoes and pronounced her fit for the road. Charlie gave her directions to Prescott and warned her about a canyon about 40 miles north that was known for rock slides. Preston was saddling his roan when she emerged from the house. "I am riding with you," he said before she could ask. "You do not need to do that. You have work here. The work will keep. I am not letting you ride alone through the roughest part of the journey when I can prevent it." "Preston, I cannot ask you to. You are not asking. I am offering. Actually, I am telling. You can argue if you want, but I am still riding with you." Amelia felt her throat tighten with an emotion she could not quite name. "Thank you." They left the Triple Cross heading north, following a wagon trace that wound through increasingly rugged country. The land here was beautiful in a harsh way, all stone and pine and wide sky. They saw deer in the early morning, a small herd that watched them pass with liquid eyes, and later an eagle circling high above on broad wings. Preston was more talkative on this leg of the journey, pointing out landmarks and telling stories about his years working the ranch. He told her about the time a mountain lion had gotten into the sheep pen and killed 4 animals before Charlie managed to shoot it. About the winter when the snow had been so deep, they lost half the herd and nearly starved before spring arrived. About the summer when a wildfire had come within a mile of the ranch before the wind shifted and saved them. "It sounds like a hard life," Amelia said. "It is, but I would not trade it for an easy one. Out here you know what you are made of, you know what matters. Back east, before I came out here, I was just drifting. Thought I wanted to be a lawyer like my father, but I hated every minute of it. Then I met Sarah and she wanted to come west, wanted to see the frontier. So we came and I found work on a ranch, and I discovered that this was what I had been looking for all along without knowing it. She must have been remarkable, your wife. She was. Smart and brave and stubborn as hell. She would have liked you, I think. She always appreciated other women who did not let the world tell them what they could or could not do. They made camp that night in a grove of ponderosa pines, the air scented with vanilla and butterscotch from the bark. Preston cooked beans and bacon over the fire, and they ate watching the stars emerge one by one in the darkening sky. Amelia realized that she had not thought about Thomas all day, that hours had passed without the constant ache of his absence, and she felt a stab of guilt immediately followed by a wash of relief. "It is all right, you know," Preston said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "To have moments when you are not grieving, it does not mean you love them any less. How did you know what I was thinking? Because I have thought the same thing 100 times. The first time I laughed after Sarah died, I felt like I had betrayed her. But then I realized she would have been furious with me for that. She would have wanted me to laugh and live and be happy again, whenever I could manage it. I do not think I know how to be happy anymore. Maybe not today. But someday you will, and when that day comes, Thomas would want you to let yourself feel it." Amelia felt tears on her cheeks, the second time she had cried in front of this man who seemed to understand her in ways she did not fully understand herself. Preston did not try to comfort her or tell her not to cry. He just sat with her in silence, the way he had promised he would, letting her grief run its course without judgment or expectation. They reached Prescott on a warm afternoon 2 days later, the town sprawling across a high valley surrounded by pine-covered mountains. It was bigger than Amelia had expected, with several blocks of commercial buildings, churches, a courthouse, and residential neighborhoods spreading out in all directions. Preston led her to a hotel on Cortez Street and helped her secure a room, then asked if she knew where to find Thomas's brother. "I have an address," Amelia said, pulling a folded piece of paper from her satchel. "Granite Street, number 47. I will take you there if you want, or you can go alone if you would rather." Amelia considered. This was the moment she had been riding toward for 400 miles, the completion of her promise to Thomas. Part of her wanted to face it alone, but a larger part wanted Preston beside her for strength and support. "Would you come with me?" she asked. "Of course." They walked through the streets of Prescott as the afternoon sun slanted gold through the pines. Granite Street was lined with modest houses, neat and well kept, and number 47 was a small cottage with a front porch and a vegetable garden. Amelia stood at the gate, suddenly terrified, her hand trembling as she reached for the latch. Preston's hand covered hers, warm and steady. "You have carried this 400 miles. The last 10 feet is not going to be what defeats you." She took a deep breath and opened the gate, walked up the path, and knocked on the door. For a long moment there was no answer, and Amelia felt an absurd surge of relief mixed with disappointment. Then footsteps sounded inside, and the door opened to reveal a man in his early 30s who looked enough like Thomas to make her heart clench. "Yes," he said, his tone polite but puzzled. "Are you James Robinson?" "I am." "My name is Amelia Robinson. I was married to your brother Thomas." James's face went still. "Was married? Thomas died of cholera outside Tucson 3 weeks ago. Before he died, he asked me to find you and give you this." She pulled the deed from her satchel and held it out with a hand that shook only slightly. "It is the deed to your father's ranch in Texas. Thomas wanted you to have it, wanted you to know he was sorry you two had argued, that he hoped you would forgive him." James took the deed with a hand that shook more than hers, his eyes filling with tears. "Thomas is dead. Yes, I am so sorry." James looked at the deed, then at Amelia, then seemed to notice Preston standing behind her. "Please come in. Both of you, I need to sit down." They followed him into a small, tidy parlor where James sank into a chair and stared at the deed in his hands. "We had not spoken in 5 years," he said finally. "We fought about the stupidest thing, whether to sell the ranch or keep it, and we both said things we should not have said. I have regretted it ever since, but was too proud to write to him." "He regretted it too," Amelia said gently. "At the end, it was the thing that bothered him most. He made me promise to find you, to make sure you knew he was sorry." James wiped at his eyes with the back of his hand. "He must have loved you very much, to have you ride all this way to honor his last wish." "I loved him very much. It was the least I could do." They talked for over an hour, Amelia telling James about Thomas's last days, about their journey west, about the dreams they had shared. James told her about their childhood in Texas, about their father who had died when they were both young, about the ranch that had been in the family for 2 generations. By the end, they were both crying, sharing grief that was made somehow more bearable by being shared. When Amelia and Preston finally left, James walked them to the gate and took Amelia's hands in his. "Thank you," he said, "for bringing me this and for loving my brother. If you ever need anything, anything at all, you write to me here. You are family now, whether Thomas is here or not." Amelia walked back toward the hotel in a daze, feeling hollow and exhausted and somehow lighter than she had felt in weeks. She had done it. She had carried her grief across 400 miles of open land and delivered her promise. The obligation that had been driving her forward was fulfilled, and now she was adrift again, untethered, with no clear idea of what came next. "Are you all right?" Preston asked as they reached the hotel. "I do not know. I thought I would feel relief or peace or something definitive. Instead, I just feel empty." "That is normal. You have been focused on this goal for so long that now that it is done, you do not know what to focus on next." They stood on the hotel's front porch, and Amelia realized that this was probably goodbye. Preston would ride back to the Triple Cross, and she would stay here or go somewhere else, and they would likely never see each other again. The thought filled her with a panic that was disproportionate to the brief time they had known each other. "What will you do now?" Preston asked. "I suppose I will stay here for a few days, figure out my next step. Maybe find work. I have some money saved, but not enough to live on indefinitely." Preston was quiet for a moment, then said carefully, "The offer still stands. If you want to come back to the Triple Cross, there is work and a place to stay. No obligations, no expectations. Just a chance to catch your breath and figure out what you want to do next." Amelia wanted to say yes immediately, wanted it with a force that frightened her, but doubt held her back. Preston, I barely know you. You barely know me. It would not be appropriate. It is a working ranch with 15 men and Mrs. Chen. There is nothing inappropriate about it. And as for barely knowing each other, I feel like I have known you longer than 3 days. Grief has a way of cutting through the superficial and showing you who a person really is. I would not want you to think. I am not ready for. Amelia stumbled over the words, trying to express the complicated tangle of feelings in her chest. I know, Preston said gently. I am not asking for anything beyond your company and maybe your help around the ranch. If more develops over time, well, we can face that when it comes. But right now, I am just offering you a place to land while you figure out your next step. Amelia looked at him. This man who had sat with her in silence, who had understood her grief without needing it explained, who had ridden beside her through dangerous country, because he believed she should not have to face it alone. She thought about the alternative, staying in Prescott alone, finding a job as a seamstress or a laundress, building a life in a town where she knew no one and nothing felt like home. Can I think about it? She asked. Maybe stay here for a few days and send you a letter with my decision. Of course, take all the time you need. He pulled a small notebook from his pocket and wrote down the ranch's address. Write to me here, or if you decide to come, just come. You will always be welcome. They stood looking at each other, and Amelia felt the weight of all the things they were not saying, all the possibilities hovering in the air between them. Finally, Preston touched the brim of his hat in that gesture she was coming to recognize as uniquely his. Safe travels, Amelia Robinson. Wherever they take you. Safe travels, Preston Xavier. She watched him walk away down Cortez Street, his stride easy and unhurried, and felt something crack open in her chest. She went up to her room and sat on the bed, and cried harder than she had cried since Thomas died, great wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. She cried for Thomas, and the life they would never have, for Sarah and the daughter Preston had lost, for all the grief and loneliness and fear that had been accumulating inside her like flood water behind a dam. When the storm finally passed, she felt wrung out but clearer somehow, as though crying had washed away some of the fog that had been clouding her thoughts. She stood at the window watching the sun set over the mountains and thought about what she wanted, not what she owed or what was expected, but what she actually wanted for herself. The answer came with surprising clarity. She wanted to go back to the Triple Cross. She wanted to see Preston's face in the morning over coffee, wanted to help Mrs. Chen in the kitchen, wanted to watch Dutch work with the horses and listen to Charlie's folksy wisdom. She wanted to be part of something again, wanted to feel like she belonged somewhere instead of just drifting from one temporary place to another. But more than any of that, she wanted to be near Preston. In 3 days, he had become someone she could talk to, someone who understood the complicated geography of grief, someone who made her feel like she might someday be able to be happy again. It was too soon to call it love, far too soon, but it was the beginning of something, and she wanted to see where it might lead. She made her decision that night and left Prescott the next morning, riding south with a lightness in her chest that had been absent for weeks. The journey back to the Triple Cross took her 3 days, following the route Preston had shown her, camping in the places they had camped together. On the 3rd day, she topped a rise and saw the ranch spread out below her in the valley, smoke rising from the cookhouse, horses moving in the corrals. Preston was working with some of the hands near the barn when she rode into the yard. He looked up at the sound of hoofbeats, and she saw the exact moment he registered who she was, saw his whole face light up with a smile that made her heart skip a beat. "You came back," he said, walking toward her. "I came back." Amelia dismounted, and they stood facing each other across 3 feet of dusty ground, If the offer still stands, I would like to stay, for a while at least, see how it goes. The offer stands for as long as you want it to, Mrs. Chen came out of the house, saw Amelia, and clapped her hands with delight. You are back. Good, good. I have been lonely for another woman. Come, I will show you where you can put your things. The next weeks fell into a rhythm that was both strange and comfortable. Amelia helped Mrs. Chen with cooking and cleaning, learned to make bread and preserve vegetables, and all the 100 small tasks that kept a working ranch running smoothly. She learned the names of all the hands and their individual quirks. Miguel, who sang while he worked, Dutch, who barely spoke except to horses, young Billy, who was always losing his hat, old Charlie, who had a story for every occasion. And she spent time with Preston, gradually at first and then with increasing comfort. They would sit on the porch after dinner and talk about everything and nothing, their conversations ranging from childhood memories to philosophy to observations about the world around them. Preston made her laugh with his dry humor, and Amelia found herself telling him things she had never told anyone, thoughts and dreams and fears she had kept locked inside. You are good for him, Mrs. Chen said one day as they worked together in the kitchen. I have not seen him smile so much since before his wife died. I am not trying to replace her, Amelia said quickly. Of course not. No one can replace someone who is gone, but life goes on and the living need love and companionship. There is no shame in finding it where you can. As fall deepened into winter, Amelia found her feelings for Preston growing beyond friendship into something deeper and more complicated. She noticed the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands when he worked with the horses, the quiet strength with which he faced the endless challenges of ranch life. She caught herself watching for him, listening for his voice, finding excuses to be near him. She thought Preston might feel the same way, but he was careful never to presume, never to push. They existed in a state of careful politeness that was both comforting and maddening. Finally, one cold December evening as they sat by the fire in the main house, Amelia decided to be brave. Preston, can I ask you something? Of course. Do you ever think about us, about what this is between us? Preston was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Every day, he said finally, but I did not want to presume, did not want to push you into something before you were ready. And if I said I might be ready, not for everything, not all at once, but ready to at least explore the possibility. He turned to look at her, and the warmth in his eyes made her breath catch. Then I would say I have been waiting for you to be ready, and I am willing to go as slow as you need. I love Thomas, Amelia said carefully. I will always love him, but he is gone, and I am still here, and I think he would want me to be happy if I could manage it. I loved Sarah, Preston said, matching her tone. I will always love her. But she is gone, and I am still here, and I think she would want the same thing for me. So where does that leave us? Preston reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm and rough against her skin. I think it leaves us exactly where we need to be. Two people who have been through hell and somehow found each other on the other side. Two people who understand that loving someone new does not erase who we loved before. Amelia felt tears on her cheeks again, but they were different tears than she had cried before, tears of relief and possibility and the first fragile shoots of hope. I do not know how to do this, she admitted. How to move forward without feeling like I am leaving Thomas behind. We will figure it out together. One day at a time, one step at a time. There is no rush, no deadline. We have all the time we need. They sat holding hands and watching the fire, not talking, just being together in the comfortable silence that had become their specialty. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real storm of winter, blanketing the ranch in white and turning the world soft and quiet. Christmas came, and the hands all contributed to a celebration in the bunkhouse. Someone produced a fiddle, and there was dancing. Amelia learning to do a passable version of a reel with Preston's patient instruction. She laughed more that night than she had laughed in months, and when Preston pulled her close during a slow song, she rested her head against his chest and felt something settle in her heart. "I am glad you came back," he murmured against her hair. "So am I." Winter passed into spring, and with the changing season came changes in Amelia and Preston's relationship. They were courting now, officially, though everyone on the ranch had been treating it as a foregone conclusion for months. Preston was everything Thomas had not been: patient where Thomas had been impulsive, steady where Thomas had been mercurial, grounded where Thomas had been a dreamer. She did not love him less for being different. She loved him precisely because he was who he was. In April, Preston took her up into the high country to see the place where he wanted to build a house. It was a meadow surrounded by pines, with a creek running through it and a view of the mountains that took her breath away. "I have been saving money for years," he said. "Thought maybe someday I would build something of my own instead of just living in the bunkhouse, but it never felt right until now. It is beautiful. I thought maybe we could build it together, if you wanted, if you were willing to take a chance on a future with me." Amelia turned to face him, this man who had sat with her in silence when she needed silence, who had ridden beside her through dangerous country, who had given her space to grieve and time to heal and never asked for more than she could give. "Are you asking me to marry you, Preston Xavier?" "I am. I know it has only been a few months, and I know you might need more time, but I wanted you to know that I am thinking about a future with you in it. A real future, not just temporary arrangements." Amelia thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned that had never materialized. She thought about grief and loss, and the way forward could sometimes only be found by letting go of the past. She thought about Preston, and the way he made her feel safe and seen and understood in ways she had not even known she needed. "Yes," she said, "I will marry you. Not because I have forgotten Thomas or stopped loving him, but because I am ready to love again. Because you have shown me that it is possible to honor the past while still moving toward the future." Preston kissed her then, gentle and sweet, and Amelia felt something inside her that had been broken start to knit itself back together. They stood in the meadow as the sun climbed higher, making plans for the house they would build, the life they would share, the future that was beginning to take shape. They were married in June in a simple ceremony at the ranch, with Charlie officiating and all the hands in attendance. Mrs. Chen cried happy tears and insisted on cooking a feast that would have fed twice their number. Amelia wore a new dress the color of cream, and Preston wore his best shirt and looked so nervous that Miguel had to elbow him to stop fidgeting. When Charlie asked if she took Preston to be her lawfully wedded husband, Amelia said, "I do," with a clear voice and no hesitation. When he asked Preston the same question, Preston's "I do" was equally firm. They exchanged simple gold bands, and when Charlie pronounced them man and wife, Preston kissed her in front of everyone, and the hands cheered. They spent their wedding night in the guest room of the main house, Mrs. Chen having decorated it with wildflowers and clean linens. Preston was gentle and patient, and if there were moments when Amelia thought of Thomas, they did not diminish what she felt for the man holding her now. Afterward, they lay tangled together and Preston traced patterns on her shoulder with his fingertips. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes. Are you?" "Happier than I have been in years. Happier than I thought I would ever be again." They broke ground on their house in July, Preston and the hands working on it between ranch duties. Amelia helped where she could, learning to hammer nails and measure boards, her hands developing calluses that matched the ones on Preston's palms. The house grew slowly, taking shape over the course of the summer. A stone foundation, log walls, a porch that would face the mountains. By September, it was finished enough to move into, though there was still detail work to be done. They carried their few possessions up the trail to the meadow and spent their first night in their own home, lying on a pallet of blankets in front of the fireplace and watching shadows dance on the ceiling. "We did it," Amelia said, wonder in her voice. "We built something. We did. And we will keep building. A life, a family if we are blessed with one, a future." In October, Amelia realized she was pregnant. She told Preston on a cool evening as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, and she saw joy and fear and hope chase across his face in rapid succession. "Are you frightened?" he asked, terrified, but also happy. "I am terrified, too, after what happened with Sarah." He could not finish the sentence. Amelia took his hand. "I know, but we cannot live in fear of what might happen. We can only take care and hope for the best." The winter passed slowly, Amelia's belly growing as the snow deepened. Preston was protective to the point of being overbearing, and Mrs. Chen came to stay with them for the last 2 months, determined that Amelia would have experienced help when her time came. Charlie rode to Prescott and came back with a doctor, a capable woman named Dr. Mitchell, who had delivered half the babies in Yavapai County. Amelia went into labor on a warm day in late April, nearly a year to the day after Preston had shown her the meadow and asked her to marry him. The labor was long and difficult, and there were moments when Amelia saw the fear in Preston's eyes and knew he was remembering Sarah. But Dr. Mitchell was skilled and calm, and when the baby finally arrived, it was a healthy boy with a strong cry and a full head of dark hair. "A son, Doctor," Mitchell said, placing the baby in Amelia's arms. "Congratulations." Amelia looked down at the tiny, perfect face and felt love crash over her like a wave. Preston stood beside the bed, tears streaming down his face, his hand resting gently on his son's head. "He is beautiful," Preston whispered. "You are both beautiful." They named him Thomas Preston Xavier, honoring both the man Amelia had lost and the man she had found. Young Tommy, as they called him, was an easy baby, quick to smile and slow to fuss. Amelia nursed him and rocked him, and sang him the lullabies her own mother had sung to her. And Preston would come in from working on the ranch and hold his son with a tenderness that made Amelia fall in love with him all over again. Life settled into a rhythm of work and family, days filled with the endless tasks of running a ranch and raising a child. Amelia discovered she loved the life she had stumbled into, loved the physical work and the changing seasons and the small community of people at the Triple Cross. She wrote to James in Prescott, telling him about Tommy and inviting him to visit, and he came that summer and stayed a week, delighting in his nephew and sharing stories about Thomas that made Amelia laugh and cry in equal measure. "Thomas would have been so proud," James said as they watched Preston teaching Tommy to pet one of the horses. "Not just of his son, but of you, of the way you honored your promise to him and then built a new life for yourself. I hope so. I hope he knows I did not forget him, that I will never forget him." "Love is not a finite resource," James said quietly. "You can love Thomas and love Preston both. There is room in the heart for all the people who matter." When Tommy was 2, Amelia found herself pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and when her time came, she delivered a daughter with Preston's cedar-colored eyes and Amelia's dark hair. They named her Sarah Elizabeth, and Preston wept when he held her, this second chance at a daughter, this gift he had never expected to receive. The years passed, each one bringing its own joys and challenges. Tommy grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved horses and followed Dutch around like a shadow. Sarah was wild and fearless, climbing trees and catching frogs and driving her parents to distraction with her antics. A third child came, another boy they named Charlie after the foreman who had become like family, and then a fourth, a daughter named Grace who was born on Christmas Eve and seemed to bring light wherever she went. Preston took over management of the Triple Cross when the owner retired and sold the ranch to a consortium that included Preston as a partner. He proved to be a fair and capable manager, and the ranch prospered under his leadership. Amelia became known in the county as someone who could be relied upon for help when neighbors fell on hard times, who would take in a child who needed feeding or nurse a sick cowhand back to health. On quiet evenings, when the children were in bed and the work was done, Amelia and Preston would sit on their porch and watch the stars come out over the mountains. Sometimes they talked about the past, about Thomas and Sarah, and all the grief they had carried. More often they talked about the present, about the children and the ranch and the life they had built together. "Do you ever regret it?" Preston asked one night when they were both gray-haired and their children were grown with children of their own. "Staying here instead of going on to California like you and Thomas had planned." Amelia thought about it, really thought about it. "No," she said finally. "California was Thomas's dream, not mine. All of this is my dream. I just did not know it until I found it." "I am glad you found it. I am glad you found me. I am glad you sat with me in silence when I needed silence. I am glad you let me grieve and heal in my own time. I am glad you showed me it was possible to love again." They sat holding hands as the night deepened. Two people who had carried grief across 400 miles of open land and found each other on the other side. The cowboy had sat with her in silence, and from that silence had grown something neither of them had expected. A second chance, a new beginning, a love that honored the past while embracing the future. Years later, when Amelia was very old, she would tell her grandchildren about the journey she had made across Arizona territory, about the promise to a dying husband that had brought her to Gila Bend, about the cowboy who had ridden beside her and changed her life. She would tell them that grief was just love with no place to go, and that sometimes you had to build new places to put all that love, had to let your heart grow around the grief like a tree growing around a rock. And when her time finally came, when she lay in the bed she had shared with Preston for more than 50 years, surrounded by children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, she closed her eyes and saw two men waiting for her. Thomas, young and smiling, exactly as he had been on their wedding day, and Preston, his hand outstretched, his eyes warm with love. And she understood that there was room in eternity for all the love she had carried, that nothing was lost, that every person she had loved was still with her and always would be. But that was many years in the future. For now, on this particular evening in 1877, Amelia sat on her porch with her husband and watched their children play in the meadow and felt grateful for every choice that had led her to this moment. She had carried her grief across 400 miles of open land, and the cowboy had sat with her in silence, and from that silence had grown a life more beautiful than any she could have imagined. The past had shaped her, but it had not defeated her. She had honored her promises and found new ones to make. She had grieved and healed and learned to love again. And that, she thought as Preston squeezed her hand and smiled at her with those cedar-warm eyes, was enough. More than enough. It was everything.